Hi guys, here back from Pax Europiana, talking and walking about Austrian identity issues and which place can be better than here at the Hofburg, where I'm walking to the Albertina to meet a friend. And you know, Austria should obviously join NATO and overcome its disastrous identity issues and be a full member of the free world and of the Western world. But I explain you a bit why this is not happening and why we are different than the Germans. Yeah? Of course, you know, we are very similar, but we are very different as well. And the big departing point is, of course, you can discuss about the Habsburgians and the German thing. You know, that's old story. Yeah? I will not harm you and your fun. I can discuss about all these issues as well. Why the Habsburgians? It was basically two families. Yeah, the one was the Hohenzollern and the other the Habsburgians. They had different direction. They owned it basically. And then, of course, what happened when they had this disastrous policy of warmongering in the second part of the 19th century, and Austria was in constant conflict with, and here comes Russia on the Balkans. We were sworn enemies. The divisions were very clear. The Habsburgians wanted more of the Balkans and the Romanovs as well, more of the Balkans. So this is simple like this. There was constant conflict because Austria was defeated from the Germans in the German Empire. And then there was obviously the normal thing for empires is to expand, and they had the issue on the Balkans with the Romanovs, with the Russians. This is the story in very clear and simple terms of the second part of the 19th century. Then, of course, the disaster of the first century, and then Austria was divided. The Austrian Empire, the Habsburgians had to abdicate, they lost the war, and then it was divided in its distinct nationalities. That's why our parliament is still called today Nationalrat. It's not the parliament, of course in English it's parliament, and all others are called national councils, Narodny, Soviet or whatever Rad, that's all over the place in Czech Republic and everywhere, because the constituent parts of the ethnicities have called themselves then the National Council of the German-speaking people. And why Austria was not basically allowed, because they wanted in 1918 and 1919 to join the Germany, that was because the French didn't want it. They said, no, you will not add the 6 million, at that time it was 6 million people, to the German Empire, because we don't want their young people to then fight against us in the Second World War, which General Foch has already very clearly predicted. And so it became, Austria was basically created by the French on their insistence, and there was a unification interdiction in that one. And that we have to say very clearly, it was like that. Then of course Austria developed, but the issue about what to do with Austria was always on the table, and then we created some different narratives. Yeah? But unfortunately it led very much to the issue of the Second World War. Let's not forget that this is absolutely the case. So Austrian identity, a big problem for Europe. Let's not forget where the bad guy came from. And he was an Austrian, because this was of course a big issue of this unification. And so Austria really mattered in the interwar years, not of its size, because we were a very complicated country. We had civil war in 1934. We had the end of democracy in 1933. We had a putsch by Hitler in 1934 in July, which was then the prime minister killed. Let's not forget that one. So it's a very complicated history. And then of course the Anschluss, then of course the entry into the Second World War, very much, by the way, also connected to the Balkan issues, because of the division of Eastern Europe between Stalin and Hitler, and the ultimate confrontation about Poland was the first part, but then in 1941 and December already, the discussions about Romania, Bulgaria, what should happen there, and this was where basically the two dictators didn't agree, and then they decided that it can be only resolved in the ultimate battle, and both of them were ready for this war, and so it happened. Austria played a minor role, but it's actually not so true what Mr. van der Bellen is always saying, that Austria neutrality was decided in the Moscow Declaration. No, 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 that was only 52 in the Stalin note after the Korea War, but Austrian sovereignty was decided. That was very good as well. I'm very much an Austrian patriot, but we should never forget that Austrian sovereignty was very much decided in order not to have attached to Germany. It was always the intention of the Western powers to separate Austria from Germany from Italy, and not to allow that. So I'm not an advocate for any form of unity, I'm for European Union. But just to be very clear, that these are the historic facts. If we deny them, we create chaos and complexity. And these are the facts of history. And that was the intention of the Western powers with Austria. And then we come to the point where the whole debate about neutralization of Germany, what to do with Germany, what to do with Austria, came all up. Stalin died after the Korean War. He was basically done with by Beria. And then came the point where he was then over in March, 5th of March. Bravo, he was an evil dictator. And he was done by his own elite because of his failure in the Korean War and his adamant intention to add another war to his war chest. And so they have disposed him, and that was in March, and then the neutrality issue was coming up. But here this matters for today's debate very much, because when you see, it's very beautiful here, when you then see why we are neutral, it's because of this situation that the Soviets wanted to try to neutralize Germany. That was, of course, impossible for the West to accept, but with Austria, because of its eastern exposure, that was a possibility. For the Soviets this was very attractive, because then, and Austrian statehood is very much connected with the Brenner, because Tyrol was in the first part, in the 1919, the big issue, not to have Italy and Germany and with one border. So we became independent due to that one, on French wishes. And it was the same in the second war, because they said, okay, neutrality can be accepted in the case of Austria, because for the Soviets it was practical to have this corridor blocked, the neutral barrier between Italy and Germany. So we became. And here this matters very much. I'm walking you, this is the new parliament, because the other one is under renovation, like Austrian democracy, fully under renovation. But why this matters so much? It's very, very logical, because we had then this moment where in Western Germany, as a NATO member, they were much more democratized. There was real denazification. There was real pro-Americanism. But in Austria, after 55, there was a narrative of neutrality, of anti-Americanism, and of course, continuous anti-Semitism, protectionism, and of gratitude towards Stalin, because the Russians were so close still. And there was this narrative of Stalin. He has liberated Austria, he has created Austria, he has neutralized it, he gave it status, and he has liberated. And then they were never mentioning that the Americans have funded and supplied and fueled via Lend-Lease the Soviet situation, but this was extinct, and there was no kind of systemic re-education of the Austrians. That didn't happen. It was just, it took only until the 80s that we discussed our guilt, because the whole thing is, don't mention it, don't provoke the Russians, don't mention the war. We were not part of it, the Austrian state was innocent, it didn't exist. And so in conclusion, the Austrians were innocent. That was the idea. And don't talk about the war. So that was the problem. But it also led to a lack of debate about the real fundamental underlying reasons. Because let's not forget, it was enormous, of course, that everybody knows that anti-Semitism was the philosophy of the big bad guy. But they don't understand that this anti-capitalism, anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, let's not forget why he has declared war against America after America declared war against Japan only. It was this very much the fundament of National Socialism was anti-Americanism and anti-capitalism and anti-Semitism. But anti-Americanism was huge. It was the fundament, this kind of jealousy against America, this underlying hate against everything America and everything capitalism, and America to be kind of in one ideological box, Semitism, Jewry and all this kind of thinking. This was one big unity. And then the Austrians, as a state, have created their own state, but they have never confronted this terrible, tragic, underlying anti-Americanist identity. And then, of course, from 55 to 90, it served it very well. You know, independent, but under the shadow of Russia, and somehow for peace, but small and neutral. And these whole lies, they have never been confronted with. And to this day, this kind of victimized, neutral, small, this is the whole idea on which Austria is built on. And that's why we are not in NATO, because we were not re-educated, we didn't confront our sin. And it is one part of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coping with the past, to confront these sins. That's my campaign. And I'm now at the, not at the end, but the end of my video. But this I want to explain about Austria, because we were not in NATO from 55 on. We are much more anti-American, anti-Semitism, anti-capitalism, and the whole disaster of Austria is the problem we face. Yeah. But we will overcome it. We have overcome the shadows of the past. We will confront our future. We will give back the hidden treasures which we have stolen. And we will join NATO as well. Be sure about it. Maybe it takes a bit longer than I was thinking, but I will run this campaign relentlessly. Be sure about it. Thanks a lot. More to come. And please support Austria joining NATO. Bye.